Tonight, we delve into a mystery so chilling it has been hidden behind the walls of faith for centuries. A series of deaths, unexplained and erased, each one leaving behind fragments that no official record dares to acknowledge. The Vatican has long been a symbol of devotion and sanctity, but beneath its sacred halls, a darkness pulses through hidden corridors, secret chambers, and rooms where the living and the vanished are catalogued in silence. This is not just about accidents or illnesses that conveniently go unreported. It is about lives quietly erased, patterns that repeat in the shadows, and events that defy logic. The people who witnessed, the people who questioned, vanished as if they had never existed, from unclaimed shoes in hidden storage rooms to bells that toll at hours that do not exist. The evidence is everywhere, yet nowhere at once. Every record, every floor plan, every cryptic note points to a system designed to conceal, to control, and to manipulate what the world remembers. So, before you think this is just another story of intrigue, consider this. What if the deaths we cannot explain are part of a silence written into the very architecture of power? What if the truth is hidden in plain sight, and history itself has been altered to make us forget? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we step into the shadows of the Vatican, and some deaths were never meant to be understood. The bell rings at midnight, and its sound rolls across the sleeping city like a warning no one dares to speak aloud. It echoes through the narrow streets of Rome, but its source lies behind the Vatican walls, where ancient marble hides more than prayers. Tonight a body is being wheeled across a courtyard lit by only a single lantern. No name is whispered, no relatives are called. No record will ever tell the truth of who this person was. And the question that trembles in the silence is simple. Who died, and why will no one say? The Vatican is no ordinary place. It is the smallest country in the world, yet it guards more secrets than empires. Tourists come in daylight to see street. Peter's Basilica, the art, the gold, the soaring ceilings that seem to touch heaven. But at night the corridors change, guards move in shadows, windows close. Bells ring not to call the faithful, but to mark something hidden. Tonight the bell signals a funeral without a name, a ritual without a story. It is said that when a pope dies, the entire world knows within minutes. White smoke rises, cameras rush to St. Peter's Square. But when a nameless priest, or a clerk, or even a visitor dies inside those walls, the silence is total. There are no reporters, there are no records. The city within a city becomes a vault, and the death becomes another line erased from history. Imagine being inside those walls as the stretcher moves. The Swiss guards march, but their eyes do not meet yours. The marble floor seems too polished to belong to a place of grief. The scent of incense lingers as if death must be disguised as prayer. Somewhere a locked door closes with a soft click. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, reminding you that this has happened before. Many times, always the same. History books tell us of great councils, of coronations, of famous excommunications. But they do not tell us about the countless unexplained deaths that vanish into the silence of the Vatican. Some were whispered to be poisonings, some sudden collapses, some called natural, though the young and strong were often the ones who fell. The official story is always neat, the truth is always missing. The bell tolls again, once, twice, 3 times. No one outside those walls will be told why. To the city of Rome, it is just another midnight sound. To the men within, it is an ending sealed away forever. And this is where our story begins. Not with a pope on a balcony or a cardinal at mass, but with a body with no name and a bell that refuses to let the night stay quiet. If one death can be erased so easily, how many more lie hidden in the centuries of Vatican silence? How many coffins rolled through those courtyards while the world slept unaware? And how many secrets were buried, not beneath stone, but beneath the silence of a church that claims to guard light, yet thrives in shadow? Tonight, the bell asks us to look closer, to to listen harder, and to question why some deaths inside the Vatican are never meant to be explained. The Vatican is not just a place of prayer and art. It is a city locked within walls of stone, where every movement is watched, and every door hides a story. To the outside world, it is less than 1 square kilometre of territory, a dot on the map, but once you step inside, it feels endless. Corridors twist like a maze, stairways spiral into dim towers, gates close with iron certainty, and at every turn, a guard stands with keys that jingle like the sound of control itself. Silence is not simply tradition here, it is policy. Each doorway leads to 2 versions of the same history. The official one is written in polished Latin, clean lines of dates and names carefully ordered for public display. The real one lives in whispers carried across cloisters, in scraps of records half erased, in eyes that look away when a question is asked too directly. This dual history is the true architecture of the city. Marble and stone may shape the buildings, but secrecy shapes the soul of the Vatican. When you pass through the bronze doors of the Apostolic Palace, the air itself feels different, heavy with the scent of old incense and something else, something colder. Every hall is lined with portraits staring down at you, faces of cardinals and popes who once held power, their eyes painted to follow. It is said that the Vatican holds more artworks than any museum on earth, yet among them are corridors never seen by the public, filled not with paintings but with locked cabinets. Inside these cabinets are keys, thousands of them, each one belonging to a door that most will never even know exists. The city is ruled by keys. The Swiss guards wear theirs tucked beneath cloaks, the archivists carry theirs on silent rings. Even the gardeners keep keys that unlock gates leading to gardens no visitor will walk through. To hold a key in the Vatican is to hold access to history, to knowledge, and sometimes to secrets darker than any dungeon. Not all keys are metal, though. Some are codes, some are rituals, some are permissions that exist only on a list no outsider can read. As night falls, the locked city reveals another face. Tourists are gone, gates shut tight, and the lights in the courtyards glow faint yellow against ancient stones. A few figures move quickly across the square, their footsteps muffled by marble. Doors close behind them and stay closed until morning. If something happens in those hours, a sudden death, a disappearance, an accident, the world outside will never know until the Vatican decides it should. And sometimes it never decides. It is this silence that defines the city more than its bells or its basilica. Rome may roar outside the walls, but inside only whispers survive. The locked city has 2 lives, one for the pilgrims who come to pray, another for those who guard secrets no prayer can erase. Between the 2 lies a labyrinth where the truth bends, and once you enter, you may never find the way out. It was early morning when the body was found in a courtyard where visitors are never allowed to walk. The space is small, hidden behind tall stone walls, a place used only by those who already know the way. The corpse lay on the ground as if sleep had ended suddenly, yet no one called for help and no alarm was raised. Within the hour, the stretcher arrived, covered in white cloth, and the body was carried away with quiet efficiency. No announcement was made, no name was spoken. In the Vatican records, every event is supposed to be carefully documented. Baptisms, deaths, appointments, even the smallest details find their way into ledgers written in Latin. But when this body entered the system, it was not given a name. Instead, it was assigned a number, a single number written in the margin of a page. A number that told archivists how to store the record, but told the world nothing about who the person had been. This is the first rule of erasure. If you remove the name, you erase the story. Names carry memories, families, places of origin, paths that can be traced. Numbers carry nothing but the cold silence of bureaucracy. Once a person is reduced to a number, they no longer exist as someone who lived. They exist only as a line that can be hidden, altered, or deleted. Those who work within the Vatican understand this rule even if they never speak it aloud. A guard may carry the stretcher, but he will never ask who. A secretary may copy the number, but she will never question why there is no name. A priest may bless the body, but he will not search for the family. Everyone plays their role in the ritual of silence. The courtyard itself soon returned to normal. The stones were washed, the doors locked. Tourists would pass nearby without realizing that a death had occurred just steps away. For them, the Vatican is a holy place filled with art and beauty. For those inside it is also a place where inconvenient lives can vanish into paperwork that means nothing. What makes this more chilling is how many similar records exist. Archivists whisper of ledgers filled with numbers, each one standing where a name should have been. No birth dates, no causes of death, only vague words like collapse or natural. Each body once had a life, but on paper they have been reduced to an absence. And so the courtyard becomes not just a scene of death, but a lesson in how history is controlled. Erase the name, and you erase the possibility of questions. Without questions, there can be no investigation. Without investigation, there can be no truth. The number remains, but the person is gone. A death without a name is more than a mystery. It is a message. It tells us that inside these walls, lives can be ended and stories can be silenced with nothing more than ink on a page. The Vatican does not need to hide the body. It only needs to hide the name. Inside the Vatican walls, the loudest voices are often silent. What carries instead are whispers, traded like currency between those who see but cannot speak openly. Archivists who spend their lives surrounded by shelves of forbidden documents share fragments of stories as they pass each other in dim corridors. Nuns who sweep the marble floors or polish chalices murmur details only half understood. Even Swiss guards, sworn to obedience, let slip words under their breath when no superior is near. Together, these fragments form what many call the whisper network. It begins with details that do not add up. A fall that left no broken bones. How does someone plummet from a balcony only to be found as if gently placed on the ground? A poisoning with no residue. A man healthy 1 hour is gone the next, yet no chemical is ever found in his blood. A prayer interrupted. A priest collapsing mid-sentence, not by weakness or age, but by something unseen. These are the moments no official record captures, yet everyone inside knows happened. The whisper network is not written in any archive. It cannot be photographed or stamped with a seal. It passes from lips to ears and then vanishes into the air, leaving behind only the weight of suspicion. One archivist may tell a nun about a missing page in a death register. That nun may share the tale with a guard while serving supper in the refectory. The guard then repeats it to a colleague on night duty, lowering his voice while the bells toll above them. By morning the story has scattered, changing slightly with each retelling but always keeping the same shadow of unease. The danger lies not in the facts themselves, but in the pattern they create. Too many falls without fractures, too many sudden deaths without cause, too many prayers cut short in silence. A single story might be dismissed, but when dozens echo through the same stone halls, they become something harder to ignore. Everyone who participates in this hidden exchange understands the risk. Speaking too loudly means dismissal or worse. The Vatican has ways of silencing those who know too much. A nun transferred to another convent, a guard suddenly reassigned, an archivist quietly retired long before his time. The message is clear. Share too much, and you will vanish from the network entirely. And yet, the whispers continue because silence is unbearable. To live among secrets without releasing even a fragment would drive anyone to madness. So the fragments slip through, soft as breath, passed from one to another like contraband. They do not answer the questions, they only deepen them. This network is the closest thing to truth many will ever hear inside those walls. Not official truth, not written truth, but the kind that grows in shadows, pieced together by those who refuse to let memory die completely. The Vatican may erase names and alter records, but the whisper network remembers. and in its hushed words lies the echo of mysteries the world was never meant to know. He was not the kind of man anyone would notice at first. A canon lawyer in his 50s, with a soft voice and a habit of carrying more papers than seemed necessary, he moved quietly through the Vatican corridors. He spent his days buried in case files, disputes between dioceses, arguments over canon law, questions of marriage and annulment. Nothing about him suggested danger. Yet, the moment he began to ask questions about the unexplained deaths, his own name began to disappear. It started with curiosity. He had been asked to review a set of files concerning a sudden collapse in one of the Vatican gardens. The report listed the cause of death as natural, but the lawyer noticed that the handwriting on the medical note did not match the signature at the bottom. The more he looked, the more he found. Documents overwritten, dates that shifted by days or even months, files that referred to people by numbers instead of names. He did what any good lawyer would do. He began to make a separate file of his own. His private notes grew thicker each week. Inside them, he sketched timelines of deaths that clustered around certain offices. He circled names that appeared again and again. He underlined details no one else seemed to see. He did not speak about his work loudly. He knew the walls carried sound, but he shared fragments with trusted friends, just enough to test if anyone else had noticed. They had. The Whisper Network had already prepared him with half-truths. His files began to join the fragments together. Then one morning, he did not arrive at his office. His desk remained untouched, a pen still resting on an open page. By evening, his colleagues whispered that he had been reassigned. Others said he had returned to his hometown. Some claimed he had fallen ill. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He was gone. No announcement, no farewell, no explanation. His files remained, stacked neatly, as if waiting for him to return. But across the top of each folder ran a red stamp. Unreadable, restricted, do not open. Even those who worked beside him every day were forbidden from touching them. To attempt would mean dismissal, and so the files sat like silent coffins, their contents locked away not by locks of steel but by orders sealed in ink. The Vatican never explained what happened to him. His name vanished from the staff list. His duties were quietly reassigned. When tourists walked through the marble halls, they had no idea that a man who had once asked the right questions had been erased from memory. But those who remembered him knew. They spoke of him in low tones, careful not to use his name, calling him instead the investigator who never was. In a place where truth can be buried with a single stamp, the most dangerous crime is curiosity. He dared to ask why the deaths never made sense. And for that, the Vatican removed him not only from his office, but from history itself. His files remain as mute witnesses, locked in red ink, waiting for someone brave enough to open them and risk the same fate. The ledger was never meant to be seen. It was not stored in the public archives or placed in the official library where scholars could request access. It was tucked away in a cabinet behind a locked door labelled routine accounts. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than records of repairs and expenses. But between the lines of plaster orders and lamp oil purchases, something darker appeared. Dates matched sudden deaths. Entries of maintenance corresponded with funerals that had no names. An archivist discovered it by mistake while searching for old invoices. The handwriting was careful but rushed, as if the scribe wanted the information recorded but hidden. Each page listed ordinary tasks. Replace wiring in the Apostolic Palace. Clean marble steps in the south wing. Inspect roof tiles above the sacristy. Next to some entries, however, small marks appeared, faint circles in the margins. When cross-checked with death registers, those marks aligned with unexplained deaths. The pattern grew impossible to ignore. Every few months, a sudden collapse or poisoning occurred, always within days of scheduled maintenance in that same location. A guard found lifeless near the archives when the walls were being repainted. A clerk dead in a stairwell when plumbing was being replaced. a priest gone during electrical rewiring of the papal apartments. Each event separated by weeks or months, yet together forming a rhythm too precise to be coincidence. The archivist who first saw the ledger whispered his findings to a nun who polished chalices. She passed the story on to a Swiss guard she trusted. Soon, the whisper network began to hum with talk of patterns, of deaths that seemed to orbit around maintenance like satellites around a hidden Sunday. The words routine maintenance took on a sinister meaning. It was not about repairs. It was about timing. Those who tried to speak louder than whispers quickly found themselves silenced. One junior clerk attempted to request access to all maintenance logs for the past 10 years. His request was denied. Weeks later, he was transferred out of the Vatican altogether. Another archivist tried to copy a page of the ledger by hand. The next morning, the ledger was gone from its hiding place, leaving behind only an empty shelf and the smell of dust. Still, fragments of memory remain. Enough people saw the pages to remember the clusters. Enough people heard the whispers to sense the design. The ledger taught them that deaths inside the Vatican do not happen randomly. They follow a schedule written in the margins of ordinary work. Imagine walking those halls, knowing that a death may already be written into the calendar, disguised as a repair order. Imagine passing workers carrying tools and wondering if they carry something else. The Vatican teaches that order is divine, yet inside its walls, even death appears to obey an order of its own, one preserved not in scripture but in the secret patterns of a ledger never meant to be found. There is a room deep within the Vatican walls that few outside the staff have ever seen. It is small, tiled in pale stone, and smells faintly of incense and antiseptic. It looks like an ordinary examination room, where a body might be prepared, studied, or blessed before burial. But the room holds a secret that reveals how truth itself can be divided. It has 2 doors, one for the living and one for the records. The first door is wide and heavy, opening onto a corridor guarded by Swiss guards. Through it come the bodies, carried on stretchers, covered with white sheets. This is the entrance that bears the weight of grief and silence. It is the door that receives the dead when questions are still alive. When the body enters here, there is still hope that someone will ask what happened, still hope that evidence might be found. The second door is different, narrow, discreet, and leading directly to a hallway that connects to the administrative offices. Through it leave not bodies but files, reports stamped with official seals, certificates declaring natural causes, summaries reduced to a paragraph that erases details no one outside will ever see. Once the papers exit this door, the truth is no longer flesh and blood. It is words shaped by authority, rewritten until only silence remains. The staff know the routine. A stretcher comes in one way. Hours later, a folder goes out the other. The 2 doors never open at the same time, yet they tell the same story in 2 versions. The version of the body, with its bruises and its silent testimony, and the version of the record, neat, clean, controlled. Which version survives depends entirely on which door you are allowed to stand before. Whispers say the room has seen many mysteries. A priest who collapsed mid-prayer, brought in through the first door, his lips still frozen in the act of speaking. A young clerk found lifeless in a stairwell, no injuries on his body, yet entered into the record as a fool. A guard whose uniform bore strange stains, carried inside at night, later declared dead of illness, though no physician ever confirmed it. Each time the body arrived as evidence. Each time the papers departed as explanation. The 2 doors never agreed. Those who work nearby pretend not to notice. A nun delivering linens keeps her eyes lowered. A clerk carrying ink avoids glancing at the stretchers. Even guards prefer to watch the floor when the wide door opens. To look too closely is to risk becoming part of the story. The room teaches them the Vatican's most efficient method of silence. You do not have to destroy the body, you only have to let the record walk out the smaller door carrying a different version of the truth. In the end, the 2 doors create 2 realities, the one that happened and the one that will be remembered. And in the Vatican, it is never the body that wins, it is always the file. The medical reports inside the Vatican are works of art in their own way. Pages of perfect handwriting, margins straight, Latin terms carefully chosen. At first glance, they appear precise and thorough, the kind of documents meant to close every question with authority. Yet the closer you read, the more you realize they are immaculate, but useless. A priest collapses in the middle of a liturgy, and the report concludes with cardiac event. A clerk found lifeless at his desk is explained as unforeseen collapse. A guard discovered in the courtyard is stamped with natural causes. The words are clean, but the answers are empty. The trick lies not in what is written, but in what is missing. No mention of bruises on the skin, no detail of the exact time of death, no description of the environment where the body was found. The cause of death is always simplified, smoothed down, until nothing remains that could spark doubt. It is not that the doctors are careless. On the contrary, the reports are so polished they seem designed for display rather than truth. But the margins tell a different story. Tiny notes scribbled as if someone wanted to speak but feared being overheard. A question mark next to the word natural, a faint word erased with a smear of ink. A small circle drawn beside the phrase cardiac event, as though the hand that wrote it did not fully believe it. Sometimes, the margins hold more truth than the body of the report itself. Archivists who handle these files know the pattern well. They read the official line and then glance quickly to the edges, searching for the faint signs of hesitation. It is their only way of sensing what really happened. A nurse once whispered that she wrote her doubts in pencil along the border, knowing someone would later erase them, but hoping another pair of eyes might see before they were gone. The margins became a battlefield where fragments of truth struggled to survive against the smooth perfection of official narrative. For centuries, the Vatican has perfected this form of silence. To call a death natural is to bury it without ever digging a grave. To write collapse is to erase the possibility of foul play. Each phrase is a cloak thrown over reality. And because the words carry the authority of the Church, few dare to question them. Outside the walls, families receive a letter, brief and consoling. Inside the walls, a page is filed away, flawless and final. Yet the silence never feels complete. Those who turn the pages feel the weight of what is missing. They know that behind every polished report there is a body that spoke differently, a face frozen with surprise, a circumstance too strange to be natural. And as long as the margins continue to whisper, the silence is never total. It is an autopsy, not of the body, but of the truth, dissected and rearranged until only questions remain, hidden beneath the perfection of ink. Inside the Vatican, not everyone carries a weapon, but many carry something far more powerful: keys. They dangle from belts, hide in drawers, or rest in the deep pockets of robes. To hold a key here is not simply to open a door, it is to hold authority over what can be seen and what must remain hidden. And those who carry the most important keys are the ones few outsiders ever notice. They are the gatekeepers of silence, the key holders. One is an archivist, an old man with hands ink stained from decades of copying documents. He speaks little, but his eyes carry maps. Hidden inside his office drawer is a folded parchment of his own making, a map of restricted stacks within the archives. He knows which shelves hold ordinary church records, and which hold ledgers marked with seals that even most priests are forbidden to touch. He knows which aisles are real, and which are illusions designed to mislead. He is not a rebel, he has never tried to break the rules, but in his quiet way, he understands the weight of each locked cabinet and the lives erased inside them. Another is a sacristan, a man whose duty is to care for the chapels, the vestments, and the bells. To most, he seems like a servant, polishing chalices and arranging candles. But he carries another kind of knowledge, the kind no manual teaches. He knows which bells ring for the wrong reasons, a bell that tolls at an hour not marked on the calendar, a bell rung too many times for what is claimed to be a single funeral. He hears patterns others dismiss as mistakes. In his silence, he has become a witness to deaths disguised as ritual. Together, they form part of a network of quiet guardians. They do not speak openly, they do not confront the system, but their keys give them glimpses into truths others never see. The archivist hears the whisper of lost names in the turning of pages. The sacristan feels the tremor of hidden deaths in the vibration of the bells. They are gatekeepers not by choice but by circumstance, and in their possession lies the fragile line between knowledge and erasure. Every night, as the Vatican locks its gates, the keyholders move unseen. The archivist secures his stacks, locking away both secrets and suspicions. The sacristan walks through the chapels, brushing dust from golden chalices while listening to the silence between the bells. Each knows that their role is dangerous. To reveal too much would cost them their place, perhaps their lives. Yet to say nothing would make them complicit in the erasure that has defined the city for centuries. The Vatican's power is not only in its walls or its wealth, but in those small pieces of metal that decide who may pass and who must remain outside. The archivist and the sacristan are not powerful men in the eyes of the world, but within those stone corridors, they are keyholders. And in their silence lies the knowledge that the truth of unexplained deaths still lives, locked away behind doors that may never open. Funerals inside the Vatican are supposed to be perfect. Every word of the liturgy, every note of the chant, every movement of the priest follows a script refined over centuries. But perfection can also hide secrets. Sometimes it is not what is included in the ritual that matters, but what is missing. A closed casket when the tradition calls for an open one. A homily that ends abruptly after only a few sentences. A date missing from the parish book where it should have been written in permanent ink. These small details are footnotes to a funeral, signs that something does not add up. The closed casket is often explained as respect, a wish to protect the dignity of the dead. Yet whispers travel quickly through the sacristy. Why is it closed when the body showed no signs of injury? Why is it sealed so firmly that even family are not allowed a final look? Archivists remember such funerals well. They know that sometimes the casket hides more than grief. It hides the evidence of a death that cannot be explained. The truncated homily is even more unsettling. A priest begins his sermon, the words echoing through the chapel about life and faith. Then suddenly, without reason, he stops. He folds his notes. The choir takes over. No explanation is given. Those who attend leave confused but remain silent. The Vatican teaches discipline in ritual, and few are brave enough to ask why a homily would end so quickly. But those who notice understand that the silence itself is a signal. Something about the life of the person in the casket could not be spoken aloud. And then there is the missing date. Parish books are supposed to be exact. Each funeral is recorded with the name of the deceased, the day of death, the day of burial. Yet, in some cases, the page remains strangely blank. The name is written, but no date follows. Or the line is skipped entirely, leaving a gap that glares at anyone who dares to read closely. It is a way of erasing without erasing. The funeral happened, the witnesses remember it, but on paper, it never truly existed. These anomalies do not go unnoticed by the Whisper Network. Nuns who prepare the chapels murmur about the sealed caskets. Guards who stand watch during the service remark on the hurried endings of sermons. Archivists copy parish records and see the blank spaces that should never exist. Each detail alone could be dismissed as error or accident. But together they form a pattern, one that suggests funerals inside the Vatican are sometimes staged as much as they are celebrated. For most who attend, the beauty of the ritual is enough. The incense clouds the air, the choir fills the chapel, the marble glows in candlelight. Grief is soothed by tradition. Few stop to question the closed casket, the shortened words, the missing date, but for those who listen closely, the silence around these details is deafening. The Vatican does not simply bury its dead. At times, it buries the truth with them, leaving only footnotes as the faint trace of what has been erased. The corridor is long and silent, its stone floor polished by centuries of footsteps, its walls lined with portraits of men who once ruled from the shadows of the church. Their eyes follow you as you walk, painted to pierce through time, and though they have been dead for centuries, their presence feels uncomfortably alive. This is the corridor of paintings, a place visitors rarely see, yet it holds a reputation whispered among guards and archivists. It is said that whenever a camera blinks here, someone soon dies. The Vatican is filled with cameras, small black eyes fixed into ceilings and corners, meant to record everything that happens inside. But in this corridor, the cameras behave strangely. Without warning, they freeze, frames lost, footage cut into moments of static. When the recordings are reviewed later, there is nothing but blank frames. At first, the guards thought it was just bad wiring, a technical error in an old building, but the pattern that followed could not be ignored. Every time the cameras blinked, within days a sudden death would occur inside the walls. Archivists began to whisper about the connection, marking down times when the cameras failed. A clerk, who collapsed in the archive, his death ruled natural, had been seen last walking through the corridor minutes before the feed went dark. A visiting bishop was found lifeless in his sleep. And on the very night of his passing, the cameras in the corridor had produced nothing but black screens. A Swiss guard fell from a staircase, and hours earlier the corridor blinked again, leaving only silence where there should have been images. The paintings themselves only add to the unease. They depict prelates of ages past, their robes heavy, their expressions severe. Some smile faintly, others stare with eyes that look less like portraits and more like warnings. Those who patrol the corridor at night say the air feels heavier there, colder, as though the portraits themselves know what is about to happen. A guard once swore he saw the eyes of a painting shift, while the cameras blinked, but his words were dismissed as nerves. Still, he requested to be reassigned and never walked that corridor again. Whispers suggest that the corridor is more than a hallway. Some believe it hides passages behind the frames, doors used long ago for movements that could never be seen in public. If that is true, then the blinking cameras are not accidents at all, but signals, interruptions meant to cover footsteps or conceal what cannot be recorded. The deaths that follow may not be coincidences, but the result of what passes unseen behind those painted faces. To this day, the corridor remains a place of unease. Guards hurry through it without stopping. Archivists avoid walking there alone. Visitors who stumble upon it feel the strange weight of the portraits and move on quickly without understanding why. Each blank frame in the recordings is officially dismissed as a glitch. Yet those who know the pattern understand what it means. When the corridor of paintings blinks, it is only a matter of time before another death is quietly erased from history. It appeared without warning in the archive, a packet bound tightly in red thread. No one signed it in, no one admitted to delivering it, yet there it sat on a desk as if it had always belonged there. The packet was small but heavy, the kind of weight that comes not from paper alone but from the secrets inside. At its centre gleamed a golden seal pressed deep into wax, a mark of authority too high to question. Across the top, in neat script, were the words Harmonized discrepancies. Inside were memos, each written in careful Latin but filled with coded initials instead of names. One memo referred to an incident in the north courtyard, another to a sudden collapse during morning prayers, another to a guard's unexplained absence. None of them admitted to foul play. None of them gave full details. Yet each memo ended the same way. Discrepancy noted. Harmonization required. The phrase was chilling in its simplicity. Harmonization did not mean investigation. It meant erasure. The archivist who found the packet knew better than to speak openly. He studied the handwriting, the style of seals, the structure of the memos. The golden seal itself was reserved for only the highest offices, and its presence meant the order had come from beyond ordinary authority. Someone wanted these deaths aligned with the official version of events, no matter how much truth had to be removed. A poisoning could become a heart attack. A disappearance could become a transfer. A violent collapse could be smoothed into natural causes. All it required was harmonization. The red thread was no accident either. In old Vatican practice, red thread marked documents that must never be separated or altered. To untie it was to invite punishment. To ignore it was to disobey. The archivist felt the weight of the thread more than the weight of the papers. It was a signal that what he held was not just paperwork, but a directive that reached into every corner of the city. It meant the anomalies that troubled the whisper network were known at the highest level, and rather than seeking answers, the order was to conceal them. Whispers spread quickly once the packet was seen. A nun overheard the archivist, muttering the phrase, "harmonized discrepancies," and passed it along in hushed tones. A guard claimed he saw a courier slip into the archive at night, carrying a similar bundle. Soon, the words themselves became code, spoken quietly whenever someone sensed that another unexplained death was about to be rewritten into silence. The red thread became a symbol of fear, the golden seal, a reminder of how high the chain of control reached. What makes the packet most haunting is that it admits the truth without ever stating it. To harmonize a discrepancy is to confess that something does not fit, that something has happened which defies the official story. Yet, instead of uncovering it, the directive demands it be buried, reshaped, and hidden. In the Vatican, even death can be edited. The packet bound in red thread proves it, and the golden seal ensures no one will ever dare to question why. He was both a priest and a chemist, a man in a plain black cassock who carried in his mind recipes older than the marble walls of the Vatican. In conversation, he spoke softly of sacraments and scripture, but when pressed in the quiet of the library, he revealed something far more unsettling. He spoke of poisons. Not the obvious ones of history, the arsenic or cyanide that leave clear traces, but the ancient tinctures developed in monasteries, crafted in silence, refined over centuries. These were poisons that left no ashes. He explained how bitter almond, the smell that betrays cyanide, could be stripped away, leaving only the invisible killer. A dose hidden in wine or water could end a life in minutes, and no physician would smell a thing. He described belladonna, once used to widen the eyes of women during the Renaissance, but here altered to kill without the telltale dilation of the pupils. A man poisoned in this way might appear to collapse of natural weakness, his eyes calm, his body still, no trace left for the coroner's notes. The chemist priest claimed that monks in remote abbeys once experimented with herbs, not for healing, but for silence. A tincture brewed from foxglove could mimic heart failure so perfectly that the death certificate would read cardiac event. Extracts from hemlock could be purified until the victim seemed to simply drift into eternal sleep. None of these mixtures burned the throat or marked the skin. They vanished into the body like shadows swallowed by darkness, leaving behind only the illusion of fate. What made his words more chilling was his calmness. He spoke not as a man describing crimes, but as one reciting history. In his telling, the monasteries were laboratories, their cloisters not only filled with prayer, but with bottles of liquid knowledge. To preserve power, he said, you needed tools not of war, but of discretion. A sword draws attention. A poison that mimics time itself draws none. Whispers suggest he once handled these tinctures himself under orders he never revealed. Perhaps he brewed them for testing, perhaps for something more. No one ever asked him directly. To accuse a priest within the Vatican is to place your own life in jeopardy. Yet the archivists remember his words clearly, the way he emphasized that a perfect poison does not announce itself. It imitates life until the final breath, then leaves nothing but silence for the record to claim as natural. When deaths inside the Vatican are explained away as sudden illness, unforeseen collapse, or exhaustion, the Whisper Network recalls his warnings. They know that science has long been able to create death that hides in plain sight, death with no ashes, no smell, no stains. The chemist priest showed that within these walls, the most dangerous weapon is not the sword or the bullet, but the tincture, a drop of liquid that erases truth as completely as ink on a page. The door stands at the end of a dim corridor, tall and heavy, its wood blackened with age, and its hinges built to withstand centuries. Above it, carved in Latin, are the words archivum secretum. The phrase does not mean secret, as most believe, but private. Yet the word feels like a veil, because what lies beyond is guarded more tightly than any royal treasury. This is the archivum door, the threshold to the Vatican's most mysterious chamber, the place where truth itself is measured by permission. From the outside, it looks like any other archive door. But those who approach it quickly learn the rules. You cannot request to see the archives in general. You must name a specific document. The problem is simple. You can only name what you already know exists, and inside the Vatican, knowledge itself is controlled. If you do not know the name of the document, you will never see it. The rule sounds logical, but in practice, it becomes a perfect trap. The archive holds millions of records, stretching across more than 1,000 years, but unless you know the exact key, those records might as well not exist at all. Scholars who are granted limited access describe the feeling of stepping inside as walking into a mouth that swallows you whole. Endless shelves vanish into the distance, lined with leather-bound volumes, bundles tied in thread, drawers stacked with parchment. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the sound of footsteps and the occasional whisper of paper. Guards patrol the aisles. Archivists watch every movement. Even the act of turning a page feels like trespass. Some who enter speak of the strange absence within. They find documents on papal decrees, on church councils, on theological debates. But when they search for anything unusual, such as unexplained deaths or erased names, the trail vanishes. Records end abruptly. Dates skip without reason. Files are indexed in ways that loop back to themselves. It is as though the archive is not simply a storage of history, but a labyrinth designed to confuse. The door itself has become a symbol within the Whisper Network. Nuns speak of it in hushed tones, calling it the mouth of silence. Guards mutter about it during night shifts, saying that once a file goes behind that door, it never comes out again. Archivists tell of requests denied because the document did not exist, only to later find a reference to it buried in another file. The archivum door is less about entry and more about control. It reminds everyone that truth here is not measured by discovery, but by allowance. For centuries, the Vatican has claimed the archive is private to protect history, to shield fragile documents from damage. Yet the true damage lies in the restriction. What use is a library of human memory if most of it is forbidden to read? Behind the archivum door lie answers to questions no one is permitted to ask. It yawns like a mouth, not because it speaks, but because it swallows, leaving silence where truth should be. The folios rest in tall stacks, leaning against one another like a silent choir waiting for its cue. At first they seem ordinary, pages of reports bound in rough covers, the kind of paperwork any institution would keep. But when the sheets are opened, the voices inside begin to clash. A coroner's hand writes the first line, neat and clinical, describing a body as it was found. Hours of death estimated, signs of bruising noted, strange marks circled. Then another hand appears, heavier, more deliberate, crossing out details with dark ink, rewriting the story into something smoother. And then a third hand follows, not medical at all, but ecclesiastical Latin flowing across the page like a final hymn, striking through what remains and replacing it with words that sanctify silence. The result is a choir of paper, each voice layered over the other, none in harmony. The coroner's words tell of mystery. The overwriter insists on natural causes. The ecclesiastical hand closes the debate with phrases like divine will or unforeseen providence. Together they sing a discordant song, one in which truth struggles to be heard. Anyone reading these pages feels the pull of the voices, the original struggling beneath the weight of the corrections, the final Latin stamp ringing like a bell that drowns out all others. Archivists whisper about these folios with unease. They know the feeling of holding one in their hands, the way the ink from different eras bleeds through, creating layers of meaning stacked on top of each other. Some say you can still see the faint ghost of the first hand beneath the corrections, a bruise described here, a poisoning suspected there. But by the time the third hand has finished its work, those details are reduced to shadows. On paper, the death becomes ordinary. In memory, it becomes forgotten. The quire of paper is not limited to 1 century. The pattern repeats across ages. A document from the 17th century carries the same 3 layers as one from the 20th. Different hands, same result. The Vatican has refined not only the art of record keeping, but the art of rewriting. History is not destroyed, but overwritten until it serves the needs of the present. A collapse becomes a fainting. A wound becomes illness. A sudden death becomes a passage into grace. Those who study these folios too closely often find themselves unsettled. One archivist claimed he heard the pages whisper when turned quickly, as if the voices inside were desperate to be heard again. A nun who translated one such report found herself unable to sleep for weeks, haunted by the faint words that had been struck through. Even guards who escort these stacks into restricted areas feel uneasy, as though carrying coffins rather than paper. The quire of paper continues to grow with each new death that does not fit the official story. Each page adds another discordant note to the song, and while the Vatican may believe the final Latin word silences all, those who dare to look closely can still hear the first voice struggling to break free. It is faint, fragile, but it reminds us that even beneath centuries of ink, truth never fully dies. He was young when he joined the Swiss Guard, barely 20, proud to wear the striped uniform and stand watch over the most famous doors in the world. To outsiders, the job looked ceremonial, but he soon learned that within the Vatican walls, nothing was ever as it appeared. Years later, in a whisper to a friend, he confessed what he had seen, or rather, what he had been told never to see. One night, his shift began as usual, posted near the bronze doors where pilgrims and cardinals passed during the day. His roster listed the hours, the locations, the rotations. But when the commander came with assignments that night, he was moved to a position that did not exist on paper. He was told to guard a side entrance deep in the palace, a door he had never noticed before. When he checked the roster later, his name was missing. Officially, he had never been there. The hours dragged in silence. The corridor beyond the door was dark, lit only by a single lamp. At one point he thought he heard footsteps inside, though no one came through. He asked another guard about it the next morning, but the man only shook his head and told him to forget it. When he looked again for the assignment, it was gone. His roster was clean, untouched, as if he had imagined the whole night. Weeks later, he was rotated again, this time placed near the entrance to a narrow passage. Before leaving him there, a senior officer leaned in close and gave him an order unlike any he had heard before. "You will stand here, but you will not look down that corridor. If you hear anything, you will not investigate. If anyone passes, you will not speak of it." The young guard nodded, but inside he felt a coldness settle. What kind of soldier is told to guard a place by pretending not to see it? When pressed about what he thought lay beyond, he admitted he did not know. The corridor was long, with doors on either side, all unmarked. The air smelled faintly of wax and stone. He once saw a shadow move across the far end, though he was too far to see who it was. Another time, in the deep hours of the night, he thought he heard wheels rolling, like a stretcher pushed across marble, but he said nothing. His duty was silence. The confession was not made to accuse, but to release the weight he had carried. He wanted someone else to know that there were shifts unrecorded, corridors unseen, duties never written down. He believed the Vatican kept these rosters hidden so that questions could never be asked. If no one officially stood guard, then no one officially witnessed anything. And if no one witnessed, nothing could be said to have happened. The young Swiss guard remains nameless, his confession passed through whispers like contraband. Yet his story lingers as proof that even those sworn to protect the Vatican sometimes see cracks in the silence. A night shift erased from the roster, a corridor forbidden to the eyes. Together they tell a story of a city where even the guards of the gates are kept blind. The Vatican hides its secrets in marble, in archives, and in ritual, but one of the strangest places is the bank. To most people, it is only a discreet financial institute, an office tucked into quiet rooms where numbers are balanced and donations recorded. Yet the ledgers kept there tell stories that no homily ever could. Among the pages of deposits and withdrawals lie lines that should not exist, condolence payments issued before the deaths they were meant to honour. The handwriting is careful, the sums precise. A payment marked for the family of a clerk dated 3 days before the man collapsed in the archive. A transfer to a distant parish listed as support for the loss of a young priest, though the priest was still alive at the time the money left the account. At first glance, these could be dismissed as clerical errors, but the pattern repeats too often. Deaths that were not yet supposed to happen already had their numbers recorded. Accounting knew what the calendar did not. Whispers say the bank remembers everything. Its ledgers stretch back centuries, each line a quiet echo of power and planning. In the old days, payments were made in coin and gold, now in transfers and coded accounts, but the principle is the same. To balance the books, you must already know the future. And in the Vatican, the future sometimes includes deaths that are not yet public. The money moves first, the announcement follows later, and the family receives a condolence letter that feels less like comfort and more like confirmation of something planned. Archivists who have seen glimpses of these ledgers describe a strange chill. It is not the numbers that disturb them, but the dates. Dates that predict collapses, drownings, or sudden illnesses with uncanny precision. One nun whispered of a page where 3 payments appeared side by side, all marked for different families, all dated before 3 unrelated deaths. She said the ink looked as if it had been written in one sitting, as though someone had already known the losses that would come. The bank does not speak of these entries. Officials explain them away as administrative timing, mistakes of record, or anticipatory charity. But those who know the rhythm of Vatican silence recognize something else. These payments are not mistakes, they are signatures of foresight. They are evidence that within the city of keys and corridors, some deaths are prepared for long before they occur. It is said that numbers do not lie, yet here they whisper of a truth no one is supposed to hear. The bank remembers when everyone else forgets. It records condolences before the bells toll, writes loss into the balance sheet before the coffin is sealed. And in that memory lies the most chilling proof of all. Death in the Vatican is not always surprise. Sometimes it is scheduled, calculated, and entered neatly into a ledger long before it happens. The Vatican does not measure time the way the rest of the world does. Outside its walls, calendars run on numbered months and fixed dates, but inside another rhythm beats. Here, days are tied to feasts, saints, and private rubrics that few beyond the clergy understand. The system looks harmless at first, a sacred schedule built to honour tradition. Yet behind it lies one of the simplest and most effective tricks of control. By shifting time itself, the Vatican can make an event happen twice, or never at all, at least on paper. Archivists tell stories of deaths that appear in records under 2 different dates. A clerk who collapsed in April, then again in May, because the feast days used to mark his file did not align with the civil calendar. On one page, he died before Easter, on another after Pentecost. Scholars outside the Vatican searching through records find themselves tangled in contradictions, never sure which entry reflects reality. And when the question arises, the answer is always the same. The calendar is complicated. It is easy to mistake. The trick works because time inside these walls bends easily. A death that occurs on the 3rd of September might be recorded as the Feast of Gregory, then later translated into another day entirely when copied into a different ledger. By the time it reaches the official archive, the death no longer belongs to a fixed moment. It floats, detached, impossible to pin down. And once an event is unmoored from time, it becomes harder to prove that it ever truly happened. Whispers claim that some events vanish altogether in this way. A disappearance during one autumn festival is quietly absorbed into the next year's calendar, and then into the next, until the line is erased. Other events are duplicated, appearing twice in 2 different months, creating the illusion of multiple deaths or multiple funerals when there was only one. Confusion is the perfect cover. If no one outside can be certain of the date, they cannot be certain of the truth. A nun once said that she witnessed the funeral of a priest whose record later claimed he had died weeks after the service she attended. A guard swore he saw a casket carried into a chapel one night, but the official calendar placed the funeral months later. To argue against the calendar is to argue against the church itself, and so the contradictions stand unchallenged. The calendar trick is not new. It has roots in the reforms of time made centuries ago when popes adjusted the very measurement of years. To move a feast was to move history. To shift a date was to reshape memory. The practice continues quietly, not on the grand scale of centuries, but on the subtle level of days and weeks. And within those shifts, the truth of deaths inside the Vatican dissolves like sand slipping through fingers. Time itself becomes the accomplice, ensuring that what happened cannot be held still long enough to question. There is a room in the Vatican that few mention, a narrow chamber lined with shelves, not of books or chalices, but of shoes. Rows upon rows of them, polished leather, worn sandals, scuffed boots. Each pair once belonged to someone who walked the marble corridors, yet no one ever came to claim them. The room feels less like storage and more like a silent necrology, a record of the dead told not in ink, but in soles and laces. Archivists who have stumbled upon it say the shoes carry stories the official records erase. A pair of black clerical shoes, still dusted with mud from the garden path where their owner collapsed. A guard's boots with a scuff across the side, the kind that comes from catching a stare, though no stare in the public maps of the Vatican matches its height. Slippers belonging to a nun, one heel worn far more than the other, suggesting hurried movements down halls where she was never meant to walk. Each shoe whispers of a life interrupted, a path cut short, a death that paperwork would later flatten into natural causes. The shoes are arranged without order. Some stand upright, polished as if ready to be worn again. Others lie collapsed, their leather cracked, their laces tangled. No labels mark them, no names, only faint traces like initials inked on the inside or a faded crest stitched into the lining. It is as though the Vatican wishes to erase even the memory of who wore them, leaving only the objects behind as mute testimony. Guards speak of the room with unease. Some say it lies near the old barracks, hidden behind a door that is never locked but always avoided. Others insist it is closer to the archives, tucked beneath stone steps where the air smells of dust and candle wax. Wherever it is, the whispers agree on one thing. To step inside is to feel as though the room is watching you, as if the shoes themselves remember. What makes the chamber most haunting is its silence. Unlike the official ledgers, unlike the carefully polished reports, the shoes do not lie. They carry scuffs, dirt, and wear that no ink can erase. They reveal that bodies moved through places no record admits. They prove that feet once walked corridors that maps do not show. And in their stubborn physicality, they resist the Vatican's attempt to reduce everything to paper. A nun once said that when she dusted the shelves, she felt as though she were tending to graves. Each shoe, she whispered, is a coffin too small to bury a name. An archivist described the room as a morgue without bodies, where absence itself has weight. The shoes stand as proof that the deaths no one explains did not vanish completely. They left behind leather, laces, and mud. And though the Vatican may try to hide the truth in silence, the room of shoes keeps its own record, one that cannot be harmonized away. There exists within the Vatican a manual not bound in gold or leather, but in plain covers, unmarked, its pages written in Latin so dry it feels like dust. At first glance, it appears to be a set of technical notes, instructions for keeping records orderly, but those who have seen it whisper of its true purpose. It is not a guide to preserving memory. It is a handbook for erasing it. Inside are the rituals of erasure, carefully outlined as if they were sacraments themselves. One section explains how to change a siglum, the shorthand mark that identifies a document. Alter the siglum, and the paper becomes untraceable, as though it never belonged to the collection where it was found. A page of testimony can be reassigned to another case, its connection to the truth dissolved by the flick of a pen. Another section describes how to resequence a folio. By shifting the order of pages, the story inside is broken, continuity lost. A coroner's note placed before a death, a signature dated after a funeral, a report out of sequence. What remains looks incomplete, even incoherent, and so the anomaly fades beneath confusion. Perhaps the most chilling instruction is the one concerning time. The manual explains how to realign a timestamp, moving an event forward or backward until the hour itself ceases to exist. A guard's last shift might be recorded as beginning at an hour after his death. A funeral may be dated before the body was found. The illusion is subtle but powerful. Once the hours no longer match, questions collapse into impossibility. How do you argue against a past that has been rewritten by the very institution meant to record it? Archivists whisper that the manual is passed only to those entrusted with the deepest shelves of the secret archive. It is never acknowledged publicly, never catalogued in any list. To admit its existence would be to confess that history is not preserved here, but carefully sculpted. Yet those who have glimpsed its pages recall the eerie calm of its tone. There are no warnings, no hesitations, only instructions written with the authority of routine. It reads as though altering memory is as natural as lighting a candle. The rituals are not grand acts. They are small gestures repeated over centuries, each one shaving away at truth until only the official version remains. A siglum changed here, a folio resequenced there, an hour moved just slightly out of place. The manual teaches that erasure does not require fire or destruction. It requires patience, precision, and silence. For those who believe records are sacred, the manual is a betrayal. Yet for the Vatican, it is something else entirely, a tool of order. To harmonize discrepancies, to cleanse anomalies, to purify history until it reflects only what the Church allows. And so the rituals continue, invisible to those outside, unchallenged by those within. In a city where faith is built on memory, the greatest power lies not in preserving the past, but in erasing it until only silence remains. She was old, her steps careful, her veil worn thin with years of service, but her memory was sharper than most believed. In a quiet corner of the convent, she carried with her a bundle wrapped in cloth, a fragile gift from another time. When she unwrapped it, the folds revealed a yellowed sheet of paper covered in precise lines and faded ink. It was a floor plan, drawn before the war, showing a Vatican that no one alive seemed to remember. The sister called it her secret, though she claimed it was never meant to be hidden. The plan revealed something unsettling. Between the clinic, the sacristy, and the archive ran a narrow shaft, a service corridor invisible on modern maps. It was not large, just wide enough for a stretcher or a cart, but its placement told the truth. It connected the three places most often whispered about in the stories of unexplained deaths: the clinic where bodies were carried, the sacristy where rituals were held, the archive where records disappeared. Together, they formed an artery of unrecorded movement. The sister explained that as a young novice, she had once been assigned to assist with renovations. She remembered the workers wheeling out rubble through this hidden shaft, their voices echoing in a tunnel that seemed to go on forever. She had asked then what it was for, and the answer was simple: service. Supplies, linens, and sometimes patients too fragile to be seen in public were moved there. But as she grew older, she noticed how often the shaft was spoken of in whispers, how often its entrances were sealed by keys she never saw again. When she showed the blueprint to an archivist, his face turned pale. He had long wondered how certain bodies seemed to appear and vanish between buildings without being seen in open corridors. Now the answer was drawn in ink. The shaft was the unseen path, the reason so many deaths were spoken of but never witnessed. To walk, it was to move outside of memory, outside of record, outside of time. The nun lowered her voice when she spoke of what she suspected. She believed the shaft was not just a convenience, but a design, a deliberate artery meant to keep certain movements hidden. A body could leave the clinic without ever passing through the eyes of guards. A sealed casket could be brought to the sacristy without crossing the main halls. A file could be carried from the archive through darkness and vanish before anyone knew it was gone. The blueprint itself was fragile, edges fraying, ink fading, yet it carried the weight of truth. The Vatican today denies the shaft exists, pointing to new plans and sealed walls. But the nun's blueprint shows otherwise. It shows that beneath the marble and ceremony lies a secret passage built not for pilgrims, but for silence. She kept it all these years, not out of rebellion, but out of duty. In her words, every artery carries life, even if it is hidden. And this one, she whispered, carried something far heavier. It carried the truth of where the dead go when no one is supposed to see. There are masses the public never sees, held not in grand basilicas beneath gilded domes, but in small chapels where only a handful of men gather. These liturgies look familiar at first, the same robes, the same prayers, the same movements passed down for centuries. Yet in their silence lies something different. Observers whisper of one ritual in particular, a private mass that emits the sign of peace, the moment when the faithful usually turn to one another, exchanging gestures of unity, is instead replaced by words spoken so softly they barely stir the air. The words are Latin, but not the phrases anyone learns in catechism. The clause translates loosely to pastoral necessities, though even scholars admit there is no real equivalent in ordinary language. The phrase has no clear theology, no explanation in liturgical books, and yet it appears in these hidden masses like a key that unlocks something unseen. The clause is whispered, almost swallowed, and then the service continues as if nothing unusual has happened. Archivists who have stumbled across descriptions of this practice believe the omission is deliberate. The sign of peace is meant to bind the congregation together, to remind each person of their connection to the other. By removing it, the ritual severs that bond, leaving space for something else. The whispered Latin fills the gap, not with unity, but with authorization. Those who hear it understand it not as blessing, but as permission. Pastoral necessities, vague and undefined, can mean anything. In practice, it becomes a seal that justifies actions no canon law could openly permit. Whispers suggest that the clause has been invoked before: unexplained transfers, sudden silences, and even deaths. A priest removed overnight, his absence explained as reassignment, had attended such a mass the evening before. A guard who collapsed during duty was later found listed in a document where the same clause appeared in the margins. The words seem to operate like invisible ink, a liturgical cover that shields whatever follows. No one outside the small circle ever knows what necessity was authorized. The Mass itself feels eerie, according to those few who have described it. The lack of the sign of peace leaves the chapel heavy, as if something essential has been stolen. The whispered Latin clause lingers in the air, barely audible, yet felt like a chill. When the service ends, there are no hymns, no joy, only silence. Those present leave quickly, their faces set, their eyes avoiding one another. The Vatican insists all liturgy follows the same universal rules. To admit otherwise would be to fracture the unity of the Church itself. Yet the silent liturgy persists, passed through generations of priests like a secret inheritance. It is not rebellion, but ritualized erasure, a way to sanctify what cannot be spoken aloud. And so the phrase remains, pastoral necessities, a pair of words that hold no earthly translation yet carry weight heavy enough to alter lives, silence questions, and bury truths before they can rise. The Vatican gardens look peaceful by day, their paths lined with roses, fountains murmuring, and statues watching silently from marble pedestals. Pilgrims see only beauty, a carefully tended paradise set within the walls of the smallest country in the world. But at night, when the moon lays silver shadows across the lawns, the gardens reveal a different story. Archivists whisper that beneath the soil lies a register, not kept in books but in the earth itself, a hidden record of temporary interments. The phrase sounds harmless enough, a place where bodies might rest before being moved to official tombs. But the truth is far less gentle. In many cases, temporary becomes permanent, for the names of those buried are never restored to memory. They are written on slips of paper, marked with dates and initials, then folded into a small ledger locked away in a sacristy drawer. These papers never see the light of official archives. They are placeholders, as fragile as the silence around them. A nun once confessed that, as a novice, she had been led into the garden at night, told to carry candles, while a small group of men lowered a wooden box into the ground. She was told it was temporary, a necessity, until proper arrangements could be made. Yet months later, when she returned to the same place, the soil was undisturbed, the box never moved. The register, she realized, was not a bridge to something else, but the final destination. The garden itself seems to remember. Certain corners grow thicker with ivy, as though nature is trying to cover what lies beneath. Archivists tell of finding strange gaps in burial records, deaths mentioned in ledgers with no corresponding tombs. Guards speak of hearing footsteps in the gravel when no one is there, or seeing candlelight flicker between the hedges though no vigil has been announced. They call them ghosts in the garden, not spirits of the dead, but memories that refuse to stay buried. The term temporary interment appears again and again in whispered reports. It explains why a casket disappears without a funeral. It accounts for why a name vanishes from official records but lingers in rumour. Each time it is invoked, those who hear it know what it truly means. The body will not be seen again. The soil will close over it. The name will be folded away and forgotten. By day, the gardens are a sanctuary, filled with fragrance and calm. By night, they are a ledger of silence, each patch of grass a page, each mound of soil a line in a story no one is meant to read. The ghosts in the garden are not apparitions, but truths buried too soon. And, though the Vatican calls them temporary, the earth knows better. What is placed beneath the moonlit soil does not return. The register remains unwritten except in whispers, and the dead remain hidden, their names lost in the silence of leaves and stone. It appeared in the archive, without explanation, tucked between unrelated files, as though someone had slipped it there by mistake, or perhaps by design. At first glance it looked ordinary, a black and white photograph of a Vatican hallway. The floor shone with polished marble, the walls were bare except for a crucifix, and at the centre of the frame a stretcher was being wheeled across the corridor. But the longer one stared, the stranger the photograph became. The stretcher was blurred, not by movement alone, but by something in the air around it, as if a faint ring of distortion circled the body. The figure lying on it was impossible to make out, the outlines smeared into shadow. More unsettling still, The faces of the men pushing it were gone. Not blurred, not obscured by light, but scratched away, gouged out of the negative itself. The damage was too precise to be accident. Whoever had scratched it knew exactly where to strike, erasing identity while leaving the rest of the image untouched. Archivists who examined the photograph whispered of its unsettling silence. Pictures from that era were rare within Vatican walls, as cameras were not permitted in most corridors. To find even one was unusual, but to find one so deliberately altered raised questions no one dared to answer aloud. Some believed the photograph had been smuggled out by a guard or a clerk and later returned in secret as a warning. Others thought it had been planted, a piece of evidence meant to prove that truth once existed even if the faces had been stolen. The blurred ring around the stretcher drew particular attention. Some said it was only a trick of the lens, the halo of motion in dim light, but others insisted it looked intentional, as though the air itself bent. One nun who saw it swore it resembled the faint glow of incense, but no thurible was visible in the frame. The ring seemed to separate the stretcher from the rest of the hallway, as if it were not merely an object being moved, but a secret being shielded. The scratches on the negative were the final touch. Anyone who has handled old film knows that damage spreads randomly, yet here the scratches stopped cleanly at the edges of the faces. They did not spill into the background, did not mar the crucifix or the marble floor. It was as if the film had been carefully carved, a scalpel taken to memory. The result was haunting. A body without identity, handlers without faces, a hallway that could have been anywhere but was unmistakably Vatican stone. The photograph quickly disappeared from circulation. Those who had seen it spoke of it in whispers, describing it as the photograph that wasn't. It existed only long enough to prove it had once been captured, then was folded back into silence. Yet its image lingers in memory. A hallway, a stretcher, a blurred ring. Faces erased with surgical precision. Proof that even when truth is caught by a camera, in the Vatican, it can still be unmade. The official record claimed it was an accident. A man had fallen from a window in one of the Vatican's older towers, his body found broken on the stone courtyard below. The report was brief, almost clinical, noting nothing unusual beyond the fall itself. But when archivists began to examine the details, the story unravelled. The window in question did not open. Its casement had been sealed decades earlier with iron and mortar, a relic of old renovations meant to preserve the facade. To fall from such a window was impossible, yet the body lay below it nonetheless. The fractures on the corpse told another story. Anyone who has seen the results of a fall from height knows the pattern. Shattered legs, crushed ribs, injuries aligned with the hard stone of impact. But this body bore wounds that did not fit. The fractures were uneven, concentrated in places that suggested blunt force rather than a single violent collision. His arms were broken at angles too clean, as though struck deliberately. His skull bore not the spiderweb crack of a fall, but the focused indentation of a blow. Yet the report insisted on the word fall, repeating it again and again, as if repetition alone could silence doubt. Those who examined the courtyard found more anomalies. The stone beneath the window bore no fresh marks, no bloodstains, no chips from the impact of bone against rock. Guards who patrolled the area swore they heard nothing. No scream, no crash, only the bells tolling at midnight as they always did. And yet by morning, the body was there, covered hastily with a cloth, surrounded by men who spoke little and wrote even less. The Whisper Network carried the story quickly. A fall from a window that could not open, a body that bore wounds no fall could create. Some speculated the man had died elsewhere and been placed beneath the sealed casement as a message. Others believed the choice of window was deliberate, a symbol that mocked the very idea of truth. By selecting an impossible place, the killers ensured the record would remain absurd yet unquestioned, for to doubt the story was to admit that something darker moved within the walls. Archivists, piecing together the fragments, noted the strange haste with which the records were harmonized. The coroner's initial notes, which mentioned blunt trauma inconsistent with a fall, were overwritten in heavier ink. His words drowned beneath official phrases. Witness accounts vanished from rosters. The sealed window itself was quietly bricked over a few weeks later, erasing the very point of contradiction. By the time months had passed, the courtyard looked as if nothing had ever happened. Yet the memory lingers, passed quietly from guard to nun to archivist. They call it the anatomy of a fall, not because it was a fall, but because it revealed how death inside the Vatican is dissected and rebuilt into something acceptable. A sealed window, fractures that tell another story, silence where truth should be. The body may have been buried, but the impossibility of that fall remains suspended in air, unanswered and undeniable. It began as nothing more than a crumpled sheet of music, pulled from the pocket of a choir boy's cassock after rehearsal. The paper looked ordinary, lined with notes arranged for a hymn. At first glance it was messy, the kind of careless scribble a child might make when distracted during practice. But when an archivist smoothed the page and studied it, he saw a pattern hidden beneath the melody. The notes did not flow as music should. They leapt in strange intervals, spelling something else entirely. The archivist realized the boy had used the notes as a cipher, each pitch aligned with a letter, and the sequence of letters formed numbers. The numbers arranged themselves into dates. They were not random. Each one matched the day of an unexplained death inside the Vatican. A guard who had collapsed near the bronze doors, a clerk who had vanished during night duty, a priest whose funeral took place with no family present. All were listed in the cipher, tucked inside a melody no one was meant to question. The boy could not have invented it alone. He was too young to understand the gravity of what he had written. Some whispered he had overheard fragments of talk among the older choristers, perhaps instructions passed in coded form. Others believed a sympathetic priest had given him the cipher as a way to preserve truth, knowing no one would suspect a child's music sheet. Whatever the origin, the note sheet had become more than practice. It was a map of silence hidden in song. The details grew stranger. One of the dates in the cipher referred to a day not yet past. The archivist who held the sheet watched with dread as that day arrived, and by evening another sudden death was announced, brushed aside as illness. The cipher had predicted it with perfect accuracy. The realization chilled him. Whoever created this code not only knew the past but foresaw the future. Deaths were not accidents, but entries written ahead of time, waiting to be played out like notes in a hymn. The choir boy himself was questioned quietly, though never officially. He shrugged when asked about the paper, claiming he had only copied the notes as he was told. He did not remember who told him, or perhaps he was afraid to say. Soon after, he was reassigned to another parish outside the city, his name missing from the choir lists. The archivist never saw him again. Only the sheet remained, folded now among forbidden documents, its creases still holding the shape of the boy's small hands. Those who have read the cipher call it the choir boy's note, a melody that is not music but mourning. Each line is a requiem written before the death it describes. Each pause, a silence heavy with foreknowledge. It is proof that within the Vatican, even children carry pieces of the secret, their innocent songs hiding the darkest of schedules. The music ends, but the dates echo on, written in a language no choir should ever be asked to sing. The scholar began his work with the calm precision of a man studying theology. But soon his research turned into something else. What he uncovered was not the gentle wisdom of saints, but a paper trail that ran sharp as wire through the centuries. The memos he studied belonged to the Jesuits, a society famous for its intellect and discipline, men who had served as confessors, scientists, and diplomats. Their memos bore the title discernment, yet within their lines, discernment meant more than prayerful judgment. It was the craft of slicing truth into threads so thin they could be woven into whatever pattern was needed. Each memo carried the same style, arguments built in delicate logic, questions phrased in careful hypotheticals. Could an action be excused if its intent was cloaked in mercy? Could silence be justified if it prevented scandal? Could death itself be considered providence if it preserved the faith of many? The words never admitted wrongdoing outright, but they bent reality in ways that stripped facts of their weight. A death might be redefined as sacrifice, a lie rephrased as discretion, an erasure sanctified as prudence. The scholar called it moral theology turned into needles, hair-fine instruments sharp enough to pierce the skin of truth without leaving a visible wound. He traced the line backward, century by century. In the 17th century, Jesuit casuists argued that what mattered most was intention, not the deed. In the 18th, their notes refined the practice, allowing silence where speech might harm the Church. By the 19th, the memos had become tools of governance, applied not only to confession, but to policy, guiding how scandals were managed, how inconvenient deaths were explained, how archives were cleansed. In each age, the same voice repeated discernment, not as clarity, but as permission to bend. The scholar admitted the brilliance of the method. These men were not careless. They wrote with such elegance that even their evasions seemed holy. A coroner's troubling note could be reframed as an error of judgment. A witness statement could be set aside as uncharitable gossip. A ledger of payments could be justified as necessary pastoral support. No lie was written, but truth was pierced until it bled away. By the time the memo was finished, only silence remained, wrapped in the blessing of reason. When the scholar reached the modern era, he found the same language still alive. Internal notes spoke of pastoral necessities, prudential discretion, careful silence. The phrases shifted slightly, but the edge of the needle never dulled. He realized with a shiver that he was not tracing an old practice but watching a living one. The Jesuit problem was not their brilliance, but their precision. In a world where facts are heavy, their words turned those facts weightless, capable of being lifted, turned, and hidden. The memos stacked before him like a cathedral of paper, each page a stone, each argument a carving, each silence a stained glass window that let through only the light approved by its makers. He closed the last folder with trembling hands, aware that he had not uncovered theology but engineering. It was not a faith built on truth, but on the mastery of cutting it apart. And in that mastery lay the quiet power to shape history itself. It was said to be an ordinary night, one of those evenings when the Vatican lay quiet under the weight of stone and centuries. The official bell schedule was posted as always, a simple chart that guided the rhythm of prayer, vigil, and rest. Yet on this particular night, 7 bells rang that did not belong to the schedule. They rang at hours that should not have existed, moments not marked on any clock. Those who heard them still speak of it as the night of 7 bells. The first rang just after midnight, though no vigil had been announced. Guards stationed near the bronze doors swore they heard it echo from deep within the grounds, a low toll that seemed to vibrate in their ribs. Minutes later, a stretcher was seen being moved quickly across a courtyard, its cargo covered in cloth. The official logs would later claim no one died that night, but the bell had already spoken otherwise. The second bell came half an hour later. This one was higher, sharper, carrying across the gardens like a warning. At that moment, archivists noticed a section of restricted shelves being cleared, volumes pulled and boxed with alarming speed. The reason given later was sanitization, a word as cold as stone. The books never returned. The third bell sounded while most of the city slept. A sacristan on duty reported it to his superior, only to be told he must have misheard. Yet he swore he saw shadows moving near the sacristy entrance, men carrying something too heavy to be books. The fourth bell was stranger still. It rang not once, but twice in rapid succession, as though something had gone wrong and been corrected. In its wake came silence thicker than before, the kind of silence that feels deliberate, engineered. Guards said even the birds went still. The fifth bell rolled over the rooftops near dawn. It corresponded with a sudden blackout of the cameras along the corridor of paintings. When the power returned, one of the portraits had been removed, its absence explained as restoration. No record exists of which figure once stared from that frame. The sixth bell rang as the sun began to rise, though the official morning bells did not follow. This one seemed to call not to the living, but to the dead. A funeral procession, quiet and unannounced, moved through the garden paths. No public mass was held, no parish register signed. The body, like so many before, dissolved into silence. The seventh and final bell tolled when the city was already awake. Pilgrims on the square heard it faintly, but assumed it was part of the morning ritual. Only those inside the walls knew it did not belong. With that bell, the night's work ended. The transfers were complete, the shelves cleansed, the bodies removed, the silences secured. Later, when officials were asked, the response was predictable. There were no bells, no anomalies, no unexplained movements. The schedule was followed precisely. Yet those who lived through it know otherwise. 7 bells rang on hours that should not exist. 7 bells marked 7 acts of erasure. And once they were done, the Vatican returned to stillness, as if nothing had ever happened. The Vatican is often described as a city of doors. There are the great bronze doors pilgrims pass through each day, the gilded doors reserved for the cardinals, and the humble wooden doors of the sacristies. These are the ones everyone sees, the ones recorded in guides and maps. But behind them lies another network, one built not of faith but of necessity, doors that appear only when one begins to cross-reference the hidden routines of daily life. Deliveries, laundry routes, and processions all reveal traces of paths that cannot exist if official maps are to be believed. It begins with the laundry, a system so ordinary it seems innocent. Trucks enter the gates carrying linens and uniforms, but the numbers do not add up. More loads go in than ever come out. The routes suggest doors that lead not only to laundries but to chambers below, places where cloth and perhaps other things are swallowed without return. Then come the deliveries. Food and wine, candles and books, crates stacked high and wheeled through corridors too narrow to accommodate them unless other doors exist. Guards quietly note the strange vanishing of carts, pushed down one hallway and never seen emerging from the other side. If questioned, the answer is always that the doors are service routes, nothing unusual. Yet the maps never list them, and the keys to open them remain in the hands of only a few. Processions add another layer. Funeral lines begin at chapels, yet end in courtyards where no exits are marked. Priests lead files of novices into prayer rooms and emerge from entirely different wings of the palace. Cross-referencing their movements against the official floor plans creates a puzzle that cannot be explained by error. The paths align only if invisible doors are drawn into the margins, doors everyone knows are there, but no one admits exist. Archivists who dared to chart these patterns produced a map unlike any printed in Vatican handbooks. It revealed not only the famous gates, but a shadow network of entries and exits threading through the city. Some led into the archives, some into the clinics, some into the gardens where burials are whispered about. The invisible doors connected them all, forming arteries that explained how bodies could vanish without witnesses, how documents could be moved without guards, how silence could be maintained without suspicion. One guard, who glimpsed the map, said it chilled him more than any rumour. It proved that the city he patrolled each night was not the city he thought it was. There were always more ways in and more ways out than he had been told. Every closed corridor might hide a threshold. Every wall might be less solid than it appeared. The Vatican insists there is nothing secret about its architecture, that all doors are accounted for, all passages known. Yet the map remains, pieced together from laundry, deliveries, and processions, a testament to the shadows behind the stone. In a city built on visible faith, the true power lies in invisible doors, the thresholds no one is allowed to acknowledge, but everyone learns to obey. The archive holds many letters, but some of them carry a different kind of weight. They are not addressed to popes or kings, nor do they record decrees or theological disputes. These letters come from people who wrote faithfully, week after week, month after month, until one day they stopped. The pattern is so consistent that archivists call them interviews with the absent. You can follow a voice across the pages, see its hopes and fears, and then watch it vanish as though cut short by an unseen hand. The strange part is that the last line is almost always hopeful. A guard writes to his brother about how he looks forward to a visit next spring. A nun writes of her joy at being assigned to the library, promising to share stories soon. A clerk speaks of finishing his work quickly so he can rest. There is no sign of despair, no hint of illness, no farewell. The final words are filled with life, and that is precisely what makes their silence so jarring. Hope, it seems, is the most abrupt way to end a life. One series of letters comes from a young archivist who described the beauty of working among ancient texts. He wrote about his excitement at finding marginal notes that contradicted official versions, promising to send details once he was certain. His last line reads, "I think I have discovered something extraordinary. I will tell you more next week." There was no next week. He never wrote again, and his name quietly disappeared from rosters. Another set of letters belongs to a Swiss guard. He wrote of his routine, of drills and night watches, his tone casual, filled with the rhythm of duty. His final letter ends with the words, "Tomorrow I am on a new rotation, but it should be easier, fewer hours." The next record of him is not a letter, but a funeral note marked private. No cause of death, no public mass. The cheerful line about rest became his epitaph. The letters are unsettling because they feel alive. They are not confessions or secret reports. They are ordinary voices cut short in extraordinary ways. Each one becomes an unfinished interview, a conversation where the other side suddenly falls silent. Archivists describe the experience of reading them as standing on a cliff, hearing the echo of a voice that will never answer back. The Vatican keeps these letters in private drawers, explaining their preservation as routine. Yet those who study them cannot shake the pattern. Each voice ends not in despair, but in anticipation. The sudden absence feels too neat, too controlled, as if hope itself were a kind of curtain pulled over the truth. The interviews never end with goodbye. They end with life still unfolding, leaving silence to answer in place of words. And within that silence lies the trace of what happened, not recorded in any official book, but in the voices that should have continued and did not. There is a notebook hidden deep in the archive, bound not in leather but in plain brown cloth, its corners worn soft from use. It is small enough to slip into a pocket, yet its pages hold something far larger than the Vatican dares to admit. The handwriting belongs to a physician who served quietly in the early 20th century, tasked with performing autopsies that were never meant to be recorded. He called his work lessons, though no student was ever meant to read them. What he described within those pages was impossible. The notebook begins like any medical record, with dates and initials, notes on height, weight, and cause of death. But soon the language shifts. The doctor writes of blood that remained clear like water, even hours after death, showing none of the dark staining expected when the body ceases. He records organs that appeared unstained, as if untouched by illness or age. He describes hearts that seemed preserved, smooth and firm, as though time itself had spared them. These were not findings of decay, but of preservation, bodies that defied the laws of biology. One entry speaks of a cleric found collapsed after a midnight mass. The autopsy revealed lungs that were unmarked, as if the man had never breathed smoke or dust. Another notes a nun whose body showed no bruises, despite witnesses claiming she had fallen down stone steps. The strangest record of all describes a guard whose heart was described as perfect, untouched by time. even though the man was well into his 50s. The physician's notes are filled with disbelief. He writes again and again that the evidence contradicts natural explanation. The doctor began to suspect that the bodies he examined had been altered before reaching his table. He wondered if tinctures or chemicals had been used, substances known only to the old monastic apothecaries. Yet even that seemed inadequate to explain what he saw. Preservatives could slow decay, but they could not erase the marks of injury, nor could they restore organs to a state of impossible purity. He began to believe he was not studying natural deaths at all, but staged remains prepared for silence. The notebook is filled with marginal sketches, quick outlines of organs and bones, notes scrawled in Latin beside them. In one drawing of a heart he writes, "Intact beyond reason." In another, beside a liver with no signs of wear, he writes, "as though newly formed." Each sketch looks like an attempt to prove the impossible to himself, a record in ink against the erasure he knew would follow. The Vatican never acknowledged his work. Official reports from the same cases speak only of cardiac failure, exhaustion, or natural collapse. The notebook survived only because it was hidden among unrelated volumes, disguised as harmless. To read it is to enter a world where death does not look like death, where the body itself seems rewritten before it can speak the truth. The anatomy lesson becomes not science, but a revelation. It shows that within the Vatican, even the dead are edited, their flesh harmonized until their silence appears perfect. Inside Vatican records, the same phrase appears again and again, written in every hand across every century. Natural causes. It is the explanation offered for priests found lifeless in their chambers, for guards collapsing on their patrols, for archivists who never finish their work. No matter the age, no matter the circumstance, the words return like a refrain. Natural causes. At first, the phrase feels harmless, even comforting, but repetition strips it of meaning until it becomes the most suspicious line of all. Consider the ledger of a single year. A canon lawyer, age 42, dies suddenly while at his desk. Natural causes. A nun, age 37, is found in the garden at dawn. Natural causes. A sacristan, age 51, collapses during a procession. Natural causes. Each case described as though life itself simply chose to end without reason. No autopsy needed, no questions asked, no doubts allowed. It is a litany recited with such faith that truth disappears beneath it. Archivists who study these reports note the eerie sameness of their tone. The margins are blank, the handwriting steady, the cause unquestioned. It is as if the pen itself has grown weary of invention and relies instead on the simplest of miracles. If every death is natural, then the Vatican requires no explanation, no defense, no investigation. Nature, after all, cannot be put on trial. But nature does not behave this way. Bodies do not all collapse in silence, leaving no trace. Illness leaves marks, injuries leave scars, poison leaves shadows. Yet within these reports, the bodies are curiously clean, the deaths strangely neat. The absence of detail becomes its own kind of evidence, pointing not to natural endings but to careful erasures. The phrase natural causes transforms from description into command. Believe this, the record says, or believe nothing at all. Some whisper that the phrase is chosen for its theological convenience. To call a death natural is to frame it as God's will, beyond human meddling. It discourages suspicion, turning grief into acceptance. Families who might otherwise demand answers bow their heads instead, told that their loved one simply passed peacefully into eternity. Even when the circumstances seem jarring, the label smooths them into silence. The more one reads the phrase, the hollower it becomes. Natural causes no longer feels like an explanation. It feels like a mask, the same mask placed over every face regardless of the truth beneath. It is spoken with such routine that it becomes almost ritual, a litany whispered not for the dead but for the living, to keep them from asking why. And so the Vatican's graves fill with bodies, marked by the same refrain. Natural causes, written like a prayer, repeated until it loses meaning. When every death is natural, nature itself becomes the most convenient miracle. A miracle not of God, but of paperwork, preserving silence with two words that explain everything and reveal nothing. In a side chapel where pilgrims are never allowed, the air smells of wax and dust. The benches are too few for a real court. The crucifix hangs low above a table, and yet this is where tribunals are said to meet. They call it justice, but those who have seen its shadow know otherwise. The trial begins before it begins, the outcome already written, the verdict sealed with incense before a single word is spoken aloud. The room itself is staged for ritual rather than inquiry. A few priests sit behind a desk, their robes stiff with embroidery. A clerk opens a folder not to record testimony, but to read aloud what has already been prepared. The accused, if present at all, is silent, his voice drowned beneath the Latin murmur of prayers. Sometimes, the person on trial is not even alive. The tribunal convened to erase a name rather than a man. What matters is not debate, but demonstration, a show of order that masks the absence of truth. The minutes are always pre-written. Archivists have found drafts dated days before the supposed hearings took place. In them, the charges are outlined with precision, the evidence noted though never revealed, the conclusions signed in careful hands. By the time the tribunal gathers in the chapel, nothing remains but performance. Witnesses, if called, repeat lines already scripted. The verdict is read as though from heaven itself, though everyone in the room knows it was inked in advance. The sealing comes at the end. A censer is swung, incense spilling across the floor. The smoke rises like a curtain, veiling the table where the documents lie. When the haze clears, the folder is gone, carried into the archive where it will sleep in silence. The act of sealing with incense turns the verdict into liturgy, sanctifying silence with the weight of ritual. No appeal is possible because no real trial was ever held. Those who have attended speak of the chill it leaves behind. The chapel feels colder after the tribunal than before, the crucifix casting a longer shadow. It is not judgment, they remember, but absence. The accused is never heard, the evidence never shown, the verdict never questioned. Justice becomes an empty frame, filled only with incense and silence. The Vatican insists that every tribunal follows canon law, that procedures are respected. Yet the records betray the pattern. Decisions appear before deliberations, signatures predate hearings, and sentences are written in ink older than the prayers said over them. The tribunal is less a court than a ceremony of erasure, a way to bury truth beneath the sound of sacred words. The trial that never opens remains one of the Vatican's most haunting rituals. It proves that justice can be staged without ever being served, that silence can be dressed in robes and crowned with incense. And when verdicts are sealed before the doors even open, no one needs to ask who won. The answer was chosen long before the bell rang to call the court to order. The vault is not what one expects. There are no golden locks, no iron bars, no gleaming shelves. Instead, there is a wall, endless and plain, lined with drawers no taller than a hand. Each drawer holds index cards, thousands upon thousands of them, the paper yellowed, the ink fading. It looks unremarkable, the kind of filing system found in a school library. Yet here lies the archive of those who were erased, every missing person reduced not to memory or face, but to a code scribbled on a card. Archivists whisper that this is the true cemetery of the Vatican. The bodies may lie beneath stone, the stories buried in silence, but the names are gathered here in fragments of paper. Each card begins the same way, with a set of initials, a number, and sometimes a date. Rarely is there a full name. The rest is shorthand, strange symbols that only the keepers understand. To outsiders it looks meaningless, but those who know can read entire lives in the small strokes of ink. The cruelty lies not in the cards themselves, but in their arrangement. Drawers are often misplaced, shuffled to other rows, left half open as if in deliberate disorder. One archivist once spent hours searching for a sequence of numbers, only to find it hidden in a drawer marked with a different code. Another swore that some drawers disappeared entirely, replaced by others bearing the same symbols but with different contents. It was as though the vault itself conspired to blur what little remained. Those who have seen the wall describe the feeling of standing before it as overwhelming. The sheer scale of the drawers stretches in every direction, a horizon of absence. Each card represents someone who once lived, walked and breathed within the city, yet whose existence has been rewritten into nothing more than a symbol. The vault does not remember them as people. It remembers them as errors to be catalogued, discrepancies to be harmonized, shadows to be filed away. Occasionally, a card slips loose, falling into the hands of someone not meant to see it. One such card carried only the initials G.L. and a date in the early 20th century. Cross-referencing parish records revealed a young seminarian who vanished from rosters that same year, his disappearance explained as transfer. No transfer ever occurred. The card was his only trace, hidden among thousands, his story reduced to a drawer misfiled on purpose. The Vatican claims such filing systems are routine, nothing more than private indexes. But those who glimpse the vault know better. It is not simply a place of order, but a place of erasure, a wall built not of stone but of silence. Each drawer is a grave, each card a headstone without inscription. Standing before the vault of names, one understands the true scale of absence. History has not merely lost people, it has converted them into codes, scattered them into misplaced drawers, ensuring they can never be found whole again. And in that endless filing, the dead remain not remembered, but permanently misremembered, as if memory itself were rewritten into bureaucracy. The bells have always obeyed. They rise and fall like clockwork, tolling names, deaths, and transfers with a precision that seems unnatural. Every pull of the rope, every swing of the clapper, writes an announcement into the air that everyone understands but no one questions. The sound carries down the corridors, through the courtyards, past the gardens where temporary graves wait quietly, and into rooms where the absent are recorded in ledger lines. They are the voice of the institution, repeating the story it wishes the world to hear. But tonight is different. The final death arrives, unannounced and unclassified, and the ropes twist against each other as if alive. The clapper strikes nothing but air. It is a sound that should be loud, resonant, and carrying, but instead it is swallowed in the shadows of the tower. The silence is immediate, heavy, almost physical. Those who would ordinarily follow the ringing stop mid-step, some staring at their hands, some at the floor, unsure how to respond to absence that refuses to be codified. A young bell ringer swears the ropes moved on their own, twisting around themselves, tangling in impossible knots. He had followed every order, rehearsed every pull, traced the proper angles and angles again, and still the sound would not come. The other bell ringers speak in whispers, half explaining the incident with superstition, half afraid of naming it. A final death is supposed to be catalogued. It is supposed to have a place in the ledger, a drawer in the vault, a card in the index, but this one defies all systems. Across the city, the silence spreads like water. Guards in corridors pause mid-step, nuns in the sacristy falter over their prayers, and the archivists hesitate before the drawers they usually open without thought. The noise that is supposed to mark the end of a life is gone. It cannot be staged. It cannot be manufactured. It exists only in the tension of ropes that refuse, in the space between expectation and sound, in the sudden knowledge that even the most meticulous system has limits. Some say the bell that will not ring is a warning, a notice from the absent themselves that their stories cannot always be erased, that not every death can be reconciled with ledger lines, index cards, or whispered Latin clauses. Others claim it is simply chaos, a final reminder that the world cannot be perfectly organized, even here. But those who stand beneath the tower, listening to the silent ropes, feel something different. They feel a fracture, a moment when the power to classify, to order, and to erase falters. Eventually the ropes are untangled, the clapper inspected, the tower searched from top to bottom. Yet when the next bell ringer climbs the stairs and pulls once more, the sound comes, but it is hollow, lacking the authority of all the ones before. It is the echo of absence, a sound that marks a life that refuses the ledger, that refuses the vault, that refuses the stage. And in that hollow tone, the keepers, the archivists, the watchers all understand that some things, even here, cannot be controlled. The final death is real, it exists. And for the first time, silence itself speaks louder than any bell. We step through a gate that should not exist. It is wrought iron, twisted and cold under our hands, yet it yields as if it has been waiting for us, for some moment when the world inside and the world outside could meet, however briefly. Beyond it lies the city of streets we have never walked, squares that are too empty, and buildings that do not quite belong to any map. The air smells of stone and candle smoke, of dust that has settled for centuries, and of secrets that refuse to be spoken aloud. In our hands, we carry a list of initials, scribbled hastily on scraps of paper, some torn from journals, others from envelopes we were never meant to read. Each letter represents a life, or the shadow of a life, a presence that the walls of the city tried to contain, catalogue, and finally erase. We do not know the full stories, the reasons, the methods, or the timing. We only know that these initials mark people who were here, who passed through the corridors, who were counted and then uncoupled from their own names. The city behind us does not grieve, it does not notice our leaving, it does not close its gates after us. Its doors remain, 1,000 of them, each locked, each guarding a corridor, a chamber, a memory that is no longer available to anyone. Some doors seem ordinary, others bear strange keyholes, some are carved with symbols that make no sense, and a few are invisible to the eye until you stand in exactly the right place. We try each in turn, carrying keys that do not fit. Some of them tingle with possibility, some are smooth and cold, and some vanish when we reach for them. Outside, the world forgets. Streets are crowded, clocks tick predictably, the sun rises and falls, and newspapers print names that do not match the people they describe. Nothing remembers what we have seen. A market sells bread, a bell tolls in a distant church, and children run with laughter that has no weight. Nothing connects this ordinary noise to the silent corridors we left behind. We are the only ones with the memory of the city that kept secrets better than anyone could imagine. We try to speak of it, but words fail. We write letters that no one reads. We draw maps that vanish. We whisper initials in the dark, hoping they will stay alive. They flutter like ghosts, fragments of stories, and they carry the weight of absence, the echo of everything that was catalogued and erased. Each initial reminds us that people existed here, people who were loved and lost and remembered only in a ledger or a drawer. At last, we let the gate close behind us, though it never truly closes, and we move into the city outside the city, carrying the list and the memory, walking on streets that obey normal rules and normal time. The city of keys is still there, behind walls, behind locked doors, in rooms that do not appear on any plan. It waits, patient and unchanging, for anyone who dares to return. We do not know if we will, and yet the initials weigh in our hands, heavy and insistent, as we step forward into a world that will forget the city, even as we remember it forever.